Okay, I'll just share my screen momentarily. Okay, so hopefully you can see my screen. So without further ado, welcome everyone to our weekly call. Last call of April already. So zooming through the year, no pun intended. The theme for the call, you're hopefully all aware of. We talked, I think, a couple of weeks ago now about the fact that the new NIST draft had been issued, Secure DNS Deployment Guide, or NIST SP 881, which both Cricket and Ross, who are joining us on the call today, are co-authors of, along with a colleague from NIST itself. So the main focus for the call today will be to for Cricket and Ross to just share some of the thinking behind the content of the draft, maybe highlight some of the differences and new additions versus the document it replaces from roughly a decade ago. And then hopefully we'll have time for questions and a general discussion. And then time permitting, at the end of that, we'll talk through some of the other sort of normal stuff that we generally touch on. And I should say thank you, as always, to DNSOARC, the sponsor of the call. Their support is much appreciated. So without further ado, hopefully many of you, I'm sure, will know Cricket, who I believe his current job title is Infoblox Executive VP and Chief Evangelist, and obviously well known in the DNS community, and also Ross Gibson, who is often on this call and has presented previously, and as I mentioned, also from Infoblox and their principal global SME. So I'll hand over to the two of you. Thanks for being able to join us today, and look forward to hearing some more about the NIST document and your thoughts on that. So, gentlemen, over to you.
Hopefully you can see that now, I assume. All right. So yes, thank you for giving us a little bit of your time this morning, Andrew. We appreciate it. And Cricket and I are here to talk about NIST Special Publication, or SP 800-81, Revision 3. For those who don't know me, as Andrew said, my name is Ross Gibson. I'm a principal SME with Infoblox, and obviously Cricket really doesn't need much of an introduction, but he's our chief evangelist. And we're going to tell you a little bit about the new draft, what it includes, what's been removed, and I'm happy to make this conversational. So if you have any questions, just go ahead and ask them as we go through. As I mentioned, we'll talk through kind of an overview of what NIST is for those who aren't familiar with NIST, what SP 881 specifically is, what's new, what's gone, and then we'll talk through a few specific subjects, and then tell you how you can make comments on it. So since we have an international audience, I figured I'd take a second to talk through NIST. So the National Institute of Standards and Technology is part of the U.S. Department of Commerce, and they produce frameworks, guides that document best practices for the industry, and they're often used for compliance, those frameworks. So what's 881 specifically? It's actually a pretty long-standing guide for deploying DNS in a secure manner. It was initially published back in 2006, and it's gone through a couple revisions already. Last one being in 2013. And a lot of the prior versions were actually focused on implementing DNSSEC, and a lot of operational components around implementing DNSSEC and managing it. And obviously, of course, how to securely configure the underlying infrastructure to run DNS servers. And obviously, since 2013, there have been a few developments in the DNS space that I'm sure most of you are intimately aware of. And so we've kind of updated the document to take all of that into account as well. So here are kind of some foundational areas that we kind of thought about as we looked to write the document. Obviously, protective DNS has been an emerging theme, along with, of course, encrypted DNS. And of course, DNSSEC is still very important. So we obviously kept that up to date as well. And then talked about resilient DNS infrastructure and securing that kind of underlying infrastructure, along with the importance of just, general operational best practices such as monitoring and the like. So what's new? As I mentioned, protective DNS, that's a completely new area in 881, wasn't covered before, and how that kind of plugs into a zero trust architecture. And there's obviously a new section that Cricket basically wrote most of, focused on encrypted DNS, and how that can improve privacy for users, along with, reducing tampering on the last mile. And then we also talked through threats. There were a lot of threats described before, but obviously there are some new things that have emerged. So those are covered as well, and how to mitigate against those. And then just overall, that's helpful to provide, operational support as well as recommendations for architecture, just to keep DNS as secure as possible. Now, you'll also notice, if you're familiar with the older documents, that it is much shorter. It's less than half the size of the prior revision. So what's missing? The biggest thing I would say that's been removed is there was a great amount of configuration details from a syntax perspective, right? So like actual configuration file examples and the like. And a lot of those have been removed, obviously, just given the pace of the document over the years and how software, tends to evolve. Doesn't make sense to have a tremendous amount of that in there, and it's better just to refer it to the software vendors themselves. So a lot of that was cut out, and that took out a tremendous amount of it. There also was a lot of operational detail around DNSSEC, specifics on how to perform key rollovers and stuff like that. And so I would say the document overall is probably more policy and best practice focused than it is truly an, step-by-step type of operational guide, which I think there was a bit more of in the prior versions. There also were a lot of discussions of protocol details and standards before, and most of that's been referred off to the actual RFCs specifically. And then, a couple just lesser used techniques or things that were out of date were just cut out as well. Any questions so far?
Just one question, right, Ross.
Sure.
In terms of the sort of target audience for the document, when I read through it, I sort of had the sort of voice of a CISO in my ear. That's sort of how it felt. It was mainly targeted at. I'm guessing that's not entirely true, but who's your intended audience?
So definitely the CISO is a part of it, as well as down to the person actually running the infrastructure. Obviously, it's not as detailed, of somebody sitting at the keyboard. It's more, I guess, aspirational or policy focused. So I think you don't really, or we're not trying to lose the original audience of those running it, but we're trying to take it up a level so that the people that they're under understand why these things need to be done. I think that had a lot to do with what we were trying to say is like, why is DNS security important? Why is encrypted DNS important? And why should you be implementing those things? Thanks. So let's dive into protective DNS. Obviously, we feel pretty strongly that PDNS is pretty much essential security these days. I've been focusing on it for several years, and I almost feel like in any large scale enterprise, it's kind of should be, standard fare in some form or fashion, because it can prevent access to so many malicious things. Lets you take threat intelligence and make it truly actionable, and also provide the visibility that it can add very easily. Obviously, I don't think I need to go too deep into encrypted DNS with this group. But in the document, we do talk about, DOT, DO, DOQ, uh, how they can be used to protect, you know, uh, basically user transactions, prevent tampering on that last mile and the like. And obviously, we've all seen that that's a growing area, and I don't expect that to change anytime soon. From a DNSSEC deployment side, we do cover kind of best practices. We talk about things like configuration and key management. The specifics of choosing keys and stuff, that was one of the areas where we referred off to a separate document because a lot of that's already covered in some other NIST documents. So rather than going through all the specifics in there, we kind of referred off to that. I think it was 857 was one of them, and then 131A, I think was one of the others. So we talk through that. We talk about, the importance of signing zones, along with a section on when maybe you shouldn't sign zones, such as internal zones. And then obviously, of course, recommendation to enable validation for any recursive infrastructure. We talk a little bit about DNS architecture, and kind of at a high level, again, more about, the importance of designing it in a resilient manner, securing the underlying infrastructure, such as the operating system, not just the DNS server software itself, and trying to isolate it, not tie it in with a bunch of other things, so that it can kind of be secured as much as possible. And obviously the general recommendations of, keeping up software, constant monitoring and the like. So where are we now? So we're in the comment period. So this is 881's initial public draft, which was released 10th of April. And it's open for comment until the 26th of May. And if you'd like to find it, the link is there. I've also put the link in the chat. And you can comment on it by sending an email to sp800-81 at nist.gov. And obviously, any useful feedback, especially from stakeholders like yourselves that truly understand the inner workings of this, obviously are appreciated. So happy to take any other questions you have about the document, about how we wrote it, or what we're envisioning.
Ross, did you see Allison's question? She asked, will you cover how much this document becomes part of the NIST compliance framework? Um, I think we're not quite sure yet, right? I'm not. We've been talking more about how other regulatory regimes, other compliance regimes, which actually reference 800-81, might end up sort of inheriting it because it's been modified. Like NIST 2, for example, I believe points to 800-81. But I don't know that we know anything specific about how it might be incorporated into the NIST framework. Do you, Ross?
Not that we've been involved in from a conversation perspective. I think, wherever it was injected in there before, obviously I don't expect that to change, but I don't know of any specific plans that Scott has to inject that. With that said, I know he's been very focused on zero trust, right? That's kind of the primary thing he's focusing on these days, more so than this specifically. So I think it certainly could be, but I think, like Cricket said, we've been more wondering how it's going to plug into other regimes.
It looks like Allison has another question.
Go for it. Feel free to come off mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yep.
Okay, hi. So my other question is, this is a specific that I think might be missing, and shall I send it to the comment period, which is the XFR over TLS? Because you talk about securing XFR, and you say there are no RFCs, but there's actually a proposed standard about that, and also it reinforces the ACL and TSIG rule. So is that something I could just give to you, or shall I submit it to NIST, or what?
Yeah, please submit it to NIST. Yeah, they're collecting that
Okay.
rather than stuff that Cricket and I would directly because they want it all run through that.
Yeah. That sounds like a great addition, though.
Did you want to comment some more on, I mean, the cricket, you mentioned about some of the other regulatory frameworks. Did you want to expand on that a little?
Well, I would say that the one that's probably on our radar, the one that we're most aware of that refers to 800-81 or previous versions, let's say, of 800-81 is NIST 2. And we have folks in Europe who are actually working pretty closely with the governing body to try to understand whether they intend for that reference to remain in force with the new version of 800-81, and also to brief them on these are the changes, exactly what Ross just did. These are the changes to 800-81. What do you think? Were you aware of these? Is this something that you want to incorporate?
I guess it's probably early to speculate whether and how they'll do that until the document's stabilized in the sort of final version, etc.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And of course, not so secretly, we would love it if it were incorporated by reference. That would be fantastic.
Yeah.
But we don't want them to be blindsided by it. We want them to understand what that means.
Oh, excellent. That's useful to hear. Thank you. Other people have questions or indeed comments if you've had a chance already to look at the draft, as Alison obviously already has. And if so, you can put them in the chat if that's easiest, or unmute and talk, depending on where you are and what works best for you.
Hey, I have a question. It's Tony Tauber. I haven't read the draft. I read a review of a similar effort that they had on secure routing, and kind of wonder what kind of discussion it might have ended up in the document about trade-offs to consider in different scenarios, since I'm guessing there's not going to be one size fits all, and especially given that if this becomes manifested in some regulations, like how to approach that in a way that leaves people latitude, so it doesn't just get blindly blindly incorporated in audit criteria and stuff like that.
Do you mean, Tony, with the requirements with respect to any particular aspect of technology, like encrypted DNS or protective DNS or something else entirely?
Yeah, I mean, just given that deployment scenarios are likely to vary, right? And also kind of business and operational imperatives. So one might take certain recommendations and not others. I'm guessing, again, not having read this document, but just wonder how or if that kind of thing was manifested.
Well, and one thing to remember is that 800-81 is a set of recommendations. They're not actually requirements. They could be, a different regulatory regime could point to them and say, it is required that you adhere to the best practices in 800-81 or whatever. But 800-81 just says, hey, this is what we recommend. And I think the tone of 800-81 up until this point, and which we've tried to preserve, is, hey, this is what we think is a good idea. You should use protective DNS whenever it's feasible. In fact, I think that's almost literally what it says. So we try to be fairly pragmatic about stuff like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I guess it's wherever feasible, and what's feasible, and how your trade-offs are considered is, I suppose, what where it can get fuzzy for people. But I think thanks for the answer.
I mean, and I would say that, in it, I can't really think of sections where we went into really detailed specifics of, like, for example, you should be implementing this particular thing and, with this particular configuration. There's not a tremendous amount of that level of detail in there, like there kind of was more of that in the past. So I'd say that's a part of it. I mean, I think there are, I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, I guess thinking about it more, maybe what I could say is, um, where it might be reasonable to identify an objective, and then talk about technologies that might be deployed in service of that objective could help, so that one might consider, oh, okay, well, I can meet that objective another way, or I can mitigate that risk another way, or that kind of thing.
And I think that there is a fair amount of that. So, for example, when we're talking about, say, protecting against unauthorized dynamic updates or zone transfers, we mention, you know, TSIG, SIG0, IP address-based ACLs, using IPsec, right? So there's a whole grab bag of technologies at your disposal. And the document just says, hey, you should be careful about this. Don't just have dynamic updates open to the world. Don't just allow anybody to transfer your zones.
Okay, makes sense. Thanks.
So it occurs to me with that sort of description that the work that I know DNSORC are keen to kick off around sort of best practice and signposting best practice, this could fit really well in that sort of ethos. So, which is a fairly overt hint to any of the program committee that happen to be on the call. I can see at least one that for the next OARC meeting later this year, this would perhaps be a really good sort of topic to include on that best practice discussion, which no doubt would have gathered some momentum by then. And I'll let any members of the program committee comment if they choose to. But whilst they're thinking, I think one of you mentioned sort of zero trust. I think Ross, you mentioned that one of your co-authors is particularly focused on zero trust at the moment. Since I haven't got the draft open in front of me, does it talk to zero trust yet, or is that
a little bit? More of how how you can leverage secure DNS or PDNS to help move towards a zero trust framework.
okay?
So yeah, it's not. I mean, it's certainly not a zero trust guide in and of itself, but it does refer to kind of how you could take these tools and leverage them to help implement an overall zero trust framework.
Yeah, fair enough. Which I guess would be mainly applicable in an enterprise scenario. I asked that mainly because I know that Microsoft will be talking some more about zero trust DNS at RSA this week. And I know the Adam Networks team are here as well, and they'll no doubt also be talking about zero trust DNS, admittedly with their slightly different architecture to Microsoft's. So that seems to be at least a micro trend in the industry at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can see in the chat that the illustrious chair of the OARC program committee has duly noted the potential for this and has helpfully told us that the sort of call for proposals for OARC 45 will be coming out later this week. So you heard it here first.
It looks like
there was a question too. Yeah.
Yeah, he said these they take into consideration the operational aspect of DNS.
If I may, if I may just kind of, I don't know if you can hear me because my network is kind of bad, but
yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, thanks. I'm just kind of following up on Tony's question. I think maybe a derivative of it. I'm assuming the document does not mention security versus performance, or doesn't really touch on that subject. I haven't read it yet, but I'm assuming it doesn't, correct?
No, I would say it doesn't necessarily address the performance impacts of, saying, putting a bunch of RPZs with millions of records in them versus running it without it. So yeah, it definitely doesn't get into that level of detail.
in that light, does it um, does it is there any way that it can be viewed as a requirement to do X? Um, for example, X being, say, extra security to without any kind of regarding to performance. I think. Do you know what I mean? First.
Yeah, I
So
mean,
again,
I think Cricket actually articulated it pretty well, where a lot of the structure is here are some risks and here are some potential mitigations, rather than saying you should be doing
Okay.
this specific thing. So it's more of a, I guess you could kind of choose your own adventure with it. Like, hey, if you're worried
Got it.
about lame delegations, this is something you should be paying attention to. If you're worried about um, cache poisoning, you should implement DNSSEC and,
Okay.
those kind of things.
But only from a security kind of angle, not from a kind of holistic, if you will, angle.
Correct. Yeah, it's just secure
Okay.
DNS deployment. It's not DNS deployment as a whole.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Sure. Great question.
Oh, hi. I had a question about sort of the security angle. There's more talk about protective DNS and using DNS as an access control mechanism, sort of for enterprises and their outbound connections. And I wanted to see if you could sort of dig into that a little bit more. Where one of the things that I'm kind of like struggling with, just maybe personally, is that the DNS is really just mapping user behavior to where they want to go, right? And typically access control has been done inline with like blocking access to things. And really what we're doing with protective DNS is we're hiding where people go. And if I'm a gray hat kind of person who wants to exfiltrate data, if I want to have access to things, you're not really relying on DNS necessarily to identify your endpoints. So can you talk about the security benefit of sort of doing blocking using DNS versus inline?
I'm not sure that our threat researchers would agree with you, Charlie. I think that,
Yes.
for example, in our experience, if you look at specimens of malware, for example, the vast, vast majority of malware uses DNS in some way, right? And of course, the initial campaigns that cause you to be infected with that malware probably use DNS as well. So I guess we don't see it that way. I mean, DNS gives the bad guys so much power, right? From pretty well understood mechanisms like fast flux to DGAs to whatever, that they use it over and over and over again, right? At so many different points in the overall life cycle of, for example, a malware campaign. It doesn't even have to be a malware campaign, but so I guess we don't see it that way. I mean, we see DNS as being used in the vast majority of many kinds of malicious activity.
Yeah.
And that's reasonable. Yes.
Yeah, I will clarify just because of the way you phrased it. I don't think that we're suggesting that protective DNS is a panacea, right? We're not saying that, oh, you can start using protective DNS and get rid of your firewalls. That's not at all the case, right? It's kind of separating things out, the best tool for the best job, right? And if we can, if we can see that where you're going is an inherently malicious target via the name, then by providing it in an NX domain, that traffic doesn't start. So it actually offloads stuff off of the firewalls by not even starting that traffic flow. So it allows the firewalls to operate on all the 10 million other things that it has to do on a day-to-day basis. Firewalls are incredibly important, and I certainly wouldn't say, oh, I've got DNS security, I can just throw away everything else, like my IDSs and everything else. It's just one more tool in the tool belt. It's one that I think it's critically important. As Cricket pointed out, our threat researchers have found all kinds of interesting things that the threat actors have been doing with DNS, things like the traffic distribution systems and other stuff that they've been doing. there's certainly a lot of room there for DNS being a very helpful security tool.
That makes sense to me. I mean, I can see it as another tool in the toolbox, and I just, I mean, part of me does worry a little bit about sort of this moves us to a zero trust system where your user behavior is allowed rather than prevented from doing bad things. So
Well,
if
that.
you're
Oh, go ahead, Charlie. Go ahead.
oh, no, I'm just so if there's essentially like here is a permitted list of user behavior in the DNS, and we're not resolving other things that people may particularly want to do. We're presupposing what people are able to do. In an enterprise system, I understand that, and in
Yeah.
the context, but we are sort of encouraging sort of a different architecture within the way we deliver DNS.
That's certainly a possible security model with zero trust and things like that. But I mean the vast majority of DNS infrastructures that use protective DNS that I'm familiar with just say, look, we're going to block you from going, from looking up these tens of thousands or even more, hundreds of thousands of domain names that we know are command and control infrastructure for malware, right? So that's the reverse, right? That's you get to go everywhere by default, but there's probably no good reason for you to look up the domain name that is, that points to command and control infrastructure for this particular species of malware,
Right, and
right?
that makes sense. That's like the RPZ model rather than the zero
Yeah,
trust
and that's
model.
Exactly.
right. And that's exactly, yeah. So as I said, the vast majority of protective DNS implementations that I'm familiar with do that rather than zero trust. Now, Microsoft with zero trust DNS seems to be sort of flipping things on its head a little bit and saying, oh, okay, it has to be resolved by a DNS server that is outfitted with protective DNS in order for you to connect there at all.
That's right. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Thanks for answering the question, guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Of course.
And I think that, I think Microsoft's model with that has a lot to do with the emergence of encrypted DNS, right? Because, people are with different applications going different places and being able to use their own DNS servers over DOE is very difficult to force someone to go to a specific DNS server in order to, implement that policy in a centralized fashion. Obviously, that's more enterprise focused, right? Somebody that's running an actual infrastructure than it is like the service provider model where you're providing to the public. But
That's right. And that's kind of where my mind went with this too, where it's hard to force someone to use a specific DNS server, right? And bad actors, you definitely can't force that. So it's kind of like we are we are providing some security for users who stay within the rules and in a way that we can enforce some users to be able, and with if you're Microsoft, right? If you can have the operating system enforce the use of one DNS server, then there's a lot of power there.
Well, one of the things that the document does say now is that you should pay attention to where you allow stub resolvers to send their queries. Um, Basically, you should make sure that the stub resolvers, the DNS clients in your environment, do use your own DNS infrastructure and don't subvert it and go off to use some public DOE endpoint out on the internet.
That's right. And I mean, one of the things about DOE is it's 443. It's traffic to a web server. So it's a little hard to look in line and sort of for an operating system to understand this is DOE versus this is typical user browsing behavior.
Yep.
Interesting.
Yeah, that which brings to mind, I think, what's when you say, and again, having not read it, the document suggests you should, but who's you directed at?
You want a bit of faith in it.
Forcing and controlling, where DNS queries get directed.
Sorry, Tony, you kind of trailed off there.
yeah,
think
I missed half of it.
yeah, we missed
Oh,
the question.
I'm sorry. So yeah, it raises a question to me. What you were just saying is that the document is suggesting that you should, and again, I haven't read it. You should control where you send your DNS queries. So who's you in that case?
Well, that's no. Go ahead, Ross.
Well, I think it depends on who the client is and what system they're in, right? I mean, in an enterprise context, obviously, which is, I spend a lot of my time working with enterprises. Um, it's whoever the network administrator is, whoever's setting that policy. And I think, Microsoft's Zero Trust DNS is one way you could implement that. I think another one is, so I think I saw Josh on, but Josh and I wrote about it more generically in our book, The Hidden Potential of DNS and Security. Yeah, it's a mouthful. Um, what we call DNAP was like DNS and Network Assured Policy. So basically, where the DNS server and the firewall talk to each other, so that if you haven't resolved it through whatever this DNS infrastructure that's designated as the authority for it, then we're not going to open that firewall to let you out. And that's basically just taking what Microsoft is doing in the operating system and putting it into the network infrastructure. Same concept generally.
Okay, so good question. I think Alison had a comment. If you wanted to unmute Alison.
Yeah, so I've read it, although quickly, and I wanted to compliment you on adding the section on lame delegations and other ways that you can get in trouble. And I know you've spent some time on sitting duck. So I think that's a relevant point, that people might do deny by default, but then allow all of the enterprise, for example, and find that they've got a sitting duck attack on some part of their enterprise. So it's really, there's like multiple interconnecting parts of DNS security, and that's something that your document has shown in a nice way this time. It's not really a question, except but the question could be, have you presented this to registrars? Because I think registrars probably need some attention to this as well.
Oh,
I wouldn't be opposed to doing it.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
I
I think, and this is something from back in my customer days, even, I think DNS hygiene is, it's difficult to do, but it's something that I think is not very well done. First of all, because it's hard to prove the negative, right? It's hard to prove like, hey, this isn't being used. And of course, those that are approving the changes are often like, well, I can't have you delete it if I don't know that nobody's using it. And so stuff just, piles up in DNS forever and it never goes away. And so people just stop looking at it, and then you end up with a lame delegation or something like that. And so we talk about, in 881, the concept of DNS hygiene, which I've also talked before, Josh and I talked about before. You have to keep on top of that stuff, especially in the external side of the house. And then with the cloud world, with so many things, pointing off to, an IP address that's not yours, and that you may stop using today and somebody else is going to be using 10 minutes from now. You have to be on top of that stuff. And that's not just the DNS administrator's part, right? The system administrators need to communicate with the DNS administrators. Some of that can be automated, right? So that when somebody decommissions something, that it actually goes and removes the record appropriately. But I think that's a critically important thing that I don't think most people focus on enough, is that, it's your job to, take care of your data and make sure that it's current.
Yes, and I can see Cricket realizing you need to evangelize where the registries and registrars are. So Prague is a great place to do that. Although if you wait for a short while, there'll be somewhere else coming up. I can't remember where the one after that is. Muscat. That might be even nicer. Zaid, did you want to come in?
Yes, thanks. More of a logistical question. What should the expectation be with regards to the comments and feedback? How do you foresee that going?
How do we foresee it going?
How do you imagine it how did you imagine it happening? Like, I send you a comment and then we just go back and forth, and then what happens?
Well, there's actually an email address that
Correct. I see.
at that you're supposed to direct the comments to. And Scott and company are sort of aggregating these comments. And I guess at the end of the comment period, we all sit down and go through them and determine, what changes need to be made to the document. And maybe there's a little bit of discourse with the person who made the comment as well to find out, what did you mean when you said X, or, are you just yanking our chain? Whatever.
Okay. And then I guess at the end of after the comment period and after the dust settles per se, there will be a new version and an update will go out according to that.
Yes.
Right?
That's right. That's right. And then, right, if the comments have been relatively minor with respect to the sort of corpus of the document, then maybe it gets published. If there have been substantive comments that have resulted in substantial changes to the paper, maybe it goes out for another review.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Of course.
Yeah, I guess it's hard to anticipate precisely what happens next until you see what the comments are, which people have got to the end of next month, 26th, as it says helpfully on your slide, 26th of May, to get those comments in.
Well, and NIST they have a process for doing all of this, right? This is not me and Cricket dictating this. NIST has a certain, way that they do it, and they have their editorial standards and requirements and boards and sign-offs and all those things. So, yeah.
I can see your colleague Jim has also referenced in the chat about the NIST 2 directive and the NIST coordination group and ENISA and so on, as well as ICANN. So there's a whole bunch of people that will no doubt be really interested in this, but I'm sure they would have already picked this up in many cases. Okay, just mindful of the time, does anyone have a last question or comment? Doesn't look like it at the moment. Well, hopefully it's at least put this on people's radar now if they hadn't picked up on it already. And I know there are people on the call from across the ecosystem, so I'm sure that will provoke some thinking post-call, and then hopefully start to get some comments flowing to the email address. To as you said, go into the well-oiled NIST machine, and some of them will find their way to the co-authors in due course. But hopefully nothing too traumatic that requires a complete rewrite, as I'm sure you've all got plenty of other stuff to do as well anyway. Well, look, unless Ross or Cricket, unless either of you had any final comments, we'll draw a line there. Not looking like it.
Yeah, just thanks very much for giving us some airtime, and I would love to encourage everybody to read the doc and give us suggestions. We've already got a couple on this call that I think we'll incorporate and that'll make it a better document.
Fantastic. And who knows, maybe one of you will be at the OARC, next OARC meeting, talking about sort of this in the context of the sort of wider DNS best practice, which would be a good thing. It mightn't be the final version of the document by then, as it's the latter part of the year.
Hopefully.
Fantastic.
That's October. I certainly hope we're done before that.
I have no idea what the NIST timelines are for publication. I guess I'm thinking in IETF terms, which could be about 2 years. Who knows? Hopefully NIST is a little sort of swifter than that is. Fantastic. Well, look, really appreciate making the time in a busy week to do this. So thank you for that. I'll just briefly do a couple of other things, and you're welcome to stay on the call or sort of drop off and do other stuff as you see fit. But I think it's a really good presentation and a good topic, and good to see the document updated. As you say, after 10 years or so, it probably needed some sprucing up. So good to see you stepping up to do that. It's excellent work. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Okay, well, let me then just quickly move to a couple of other things then. So I'll reshare my screen. Just to highlight from the sort of weekly news headlines, having mentioned zero trust, yeah, that wasn't entirely random to mention that. As you'll see, the sort of further information about how people can access the public preview of Microsoft's Zero Trust DNS initiative by using the Windows 11 insider builds. And if any of you are in San Francisco for the RSA conference, I think some of the team will be on the Microsoft stand and happy to talk about that. So you can talk about that face to face. As also Echo, the German-based internet industry group, has published a document on countering DNS abuse, which is an output from a recent workshop with people from both the industry and also the European Commission. So that's good to see. And coincidentally, also this week, let's talk about DNS abuse. Both the Taiwan Network Information Center has published their thoughts on how to prevent domain name abuse. And also from a UK point of view, Nominet has sort of put out more information on its thinking about its most trusted namespace initiative, again, on how to continue to drive down levels of DNS abuse and related harms. So a few different things on DNS abuse all coming out over the last few days. Also, again, coinciding with the quarterly report from VeriSign, the domain name industry brief quarterly report, which talked about the total number of domain names and show that it continues to grow. There were reports from both DNS Filter and also domain tools looking about the way that sort of new domains are particularly at risk from abuse of different types. So a couple of different aspects of that. So that was it's good to see those both looking at that sort of trend this week. And then final one I'll mention, on the back of Verizon's 2025 data breach investigations report, which came out last week, both Domain Tools and Infoblox published separate posts just reflecting on both the report and their respective contributions to it. So a few different things there which were of interest, which you may want to dip into. In terms of other stuff, plenty of other things. I won't go through all these, but I just highlight two. One is the FBI seeking help to unmask the Salt Typhoon hackers, which was very much in the news a few months ago, but as the breaches continue, so you may want to take a look at that. And also on the subject of certainly zero trust, not zero trust, 0 day, etc. You all will have seen the news about the sort of potential cessation of funding for the CVE program a week or so back, and CISA have stepped up to make some funding available. And as a statement from them, you'll see roughly sort of just over halfway down the screen, as well as a whole load of other things, a few of which caught my eye around mainly policy-related stuff, which came out around internet governance, etc. So those who were interested in policy and all that's certainly worth your while to take a look at. A couple of deadlines coming up this week. One is the Applied Networking Research Workshop, ANRW. Got a call for papers, and the deadline for that's tomorrow. So if you are planning to submit stuff for the next ANRW workshop sessions, then remember to submit those by tomorrow. And also on Wednesday, there's an open call for recruitment of ICT standardization experts by, I think was it Etsy. So just be aware that that deadline is Wednesday of this week. And then we've got a few things coming up. You'll see later on the 2nd of May, actually Friday, is the deadline for RIPE 90 lightning talk submissions as well. So if you plan to put a lightning talk forward for presentation in Lisbon, then you've got till Friday for that. The other one I'll highlight, as we've we're just talking about it, is it's the end of May, or 26th of May, precisely, for comments on the NIST document. So again, that's a reminder of the email. It's also in the chat as well. So don't forget to do that. And also the one at the bottom of the screen, just for memory, there's a call for papers for AppNext 60. The 14th of July is the final deadline, but there are a couple of interim deadlines as well. And if they capture enough papers before the 14th, then they'll close the call early. So if you want to put anything forward for AppNext 60, then submitting it from now onwards. Best not to wait till July before pushing the button on your submission. Otherwise, you may miss the vote. In terms of forthcoming events, there's a lot of stuff on over the next 2 months, as you can see. Quite a comprehensive list for May and June. I've highlighted those which I'm in bold that I'll be at. So if you're obviously in San Francisco, as we mentioned earlier, do come say hi at the RSA conference, or if you're going to be in RIPE 90 in Lisbon, or the pre-event in London, or IGF in Lillestrøm, again, be good to meet up in person there, but there's plenty of other stuff happening in between, as you can see. Quite a busy 2 months with a lot of stuff which has got at least some relevance to the DNS ecosystem. And then finally, in terms of the call next week, that we haven't quite nailed it up yet, but we may be talking about ServStale. Kathy and I just need to sort of finalise the discussion on that. But irrespective of that, we certainly will at least briefly touch on anything that's likely to be of interest on the RIPE 90 agenda, and also I'll reflect on anything that's particularly pertinent from the RSA conference this week. So we'll certainly cover those, and maybe also talk about ServStale as well. I'll confirm that by the end of this week, so you're aware what's on the agenda for Monday. I think that's everything from me, other than just say thank you to DNS OAuth for sponsoring the call, and just ask if anyone's got anything that you would like to just highlight before we wrap the call up. And if you do, either pop it in the chat or just as we were just now, feel free to raise your virtual hand or just unmute and share, whichever's easiest for you. I'll pause for a moment and see if anyone does. Seeing any hands raised, or indeed anyone typing at the moment. No? Okay. All right. Well, thanks again, Ross and Cricket, echoing the comment from Alice in the chat. Really appreciate the presentation. I'm sure there'll be some more people taking a look at the document and putting their comments in. So thanks for taking the time out to share that with us and answer a few questions. Hopefully I'll see a few people through the RSA agenda this week, but if not, have a fantastic week and look forward to catching up same time next week when I'll be sort of back home in the UK. So see you all then. Have a great week, everyone.
Thanks, you too.